Hello and welcome to A to Z Vaping. Today I'm going to be showing you how to make your very own one of these, a mechanical box mod. Stick around and I'll show you how to do it yourself. So the first thing you're going to need when you decide to build your own box mod is your box. I went with a Hammond 1590B for this video. It's a very popular box. People use it for dual battery builds. I'm just going to be using a single in this one to show you. Same basic concept, except instead of using a single battery holder, you'd be using a dual battery holder. About this box, I prepped it already, and what I did by prepping it is I basically stuck each piece inside of there and figured out, where I needed to place everything so it would fit without hitting, and lay out my holes by measuring and marking them with a pencil. And you can see what I've done so far is I've drilled the 3 main holes, which is going to be for my 510 connector, my LED, which I decided to install my optional LED, and my firing button hole. I have the sizes listed on screen for the buttons I used. The other prep work I did was I drilled 5 1/16 holes along the bottom there just for emergency vent holes. I like putting them on the bottom because it kind of hides them a little bit, and not that it ever happened, but if moisture got in there, at least it could drain out the bottom. The last piece of prep work I did, since I'm using such a large button, I had to notch out part of the lid there. You could probably see that. Yeah. I had to notch that out because when the nut is on the switch itself, it protrudes too high and the lid will not close. But a little work with a file, that made short work of all that. Next piece you need is your 510 connector. There's a lot of different choices out there for 510 connectors. I've got some of the Fat Daddy vape ones, which are kind of like a helicoil, where you drill out and tap in a new thread size and thread these suckers in there to fix it. Like you'd use this on a Nemesis or something if you stripped your 510 connector. But I got extras of these, so I'm going to be building this mod with that. I'm going to retain it just with the locking nut on it and epoxy as well, JB Weld. Here are some of the other Fat Daddy vape connectors. These are the little nicer ones with the 22mm rings. I've also got some of the Egos. This is actually what I first built with back when I did my baby bottle mod. They're just a really cheap little connector. These go for $1 or $2 on eBay each. These I've tested down to 0.3 ohms on continuous vaping, and they have held up, but I'm not so sure they would in the long run. If you could see there, it's a pretty thin and cheap insulator material there, that little ring of nylon. So I would stick at 0.6 or above for those, just to be safe. Next piece, battery holder. Your battery holder is a very important point, especially if you're going to be sub-ohming. I first bought these battery holders, not thinking too much of it. I quickly found out that these spring contacts here with the coiled spring, those will melt under a low load. Anything sub-ohming will melt these. They'll just cringe up and get brittle. So don't even waste your time with these. These things are garbage. Stick with this kind. This is a PCB board mounting battery holder. You can see it's got 2 small pins, basically meant to stick down into a wafer board and be soldered down. In the past I've bent these up and soldered to them. You can also do how they do on the Hannah, which is they solder to the top of these. You don't want to solder inside the little spring connector because it'll lose flexibility then. When you stick the battery in and out, you want these little springs to flex and let it in there. Next piece, you're going to need some 14 gauge wire. 14 gauge copper stranded. 14 gauge stranded works best. Tested it down to 0.3 ohms, vaping on it all the time. Never had any problems. Definitely handles all the current. You won't have any problems with 14 gauge. You're also going to want some electrical tape or heat shrink to finish off your job. And like I said, optionally, I'll be installing an LED. This is a 5mm high bright white LED, 3.3 to 3.5 operating volts at 25 milliamps. Inside the heat shrink here, I've already wired the resistor. Basically, all I did is cut down the resistor so it had shorter tabs and solder it onto the LED and then heat shrink both leads. So just a quick little fix. Moving on to the next step now, we're going to start fabricating. Okay, so as we begin, first thing I'm going to do is kind of lay everything out, dry fit it all, make sure that my holes are good. Giggity. So I start by taking the 510 connector apart by just pushing it downward. You'll pop out these spring contacts. just pull these out. I'm going to clip off the little bit extra there so I don't have any protruding below the bottom of the connector. You can see when it's in there, it definitely protrudes out the bottom. So if you are using a metal box, anything conductive, you'll have a problem with shorting if you don't take care of this contact. You can clip it, heat shrink it, you know, do whatever you need to. So I'm just taking it out here and I'm going to clip off that little bit of extra lead there. There we go. Just get a good clip on it, then just work it back and forth. It should give you a nice clean cut. You can see now I just got the spring contact. I'll reinsert it. They're ambidextrous, they go in either way. So just stick it in there until you feel it click in place. Then repeat the process for the other contact. That one came off easier. Much easier. Let's stick that back in there. Now, we could place that in our box. Just approximately, we're going to lay in the switch at 510 connector as well. Space everything out, measure our wires. This time, instead of welding to those tabs that I just cut off, I'm sorry, soldering, I'm going to be doing the same method Hannah does, where they solder across the top of the connector. But since I'm using such a large box and I'm going to have all this extra space, I'm going to use it till they got a handy little hole in here, actually. And I tested it. It works perfect for 14 gauge. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually stick the wire in through that hole, and the little stripped bit is going to be along the curvature here on the spring contact. So I'm not going to go across the whole thing. I don't want the battery to actually have to contact the wire, but it's going to be right up here in the curvature, just enough out of the way. So we'll set that in there. We take our switch. Per shove. Now, depending on if I made this LED's leads too short, I might have to turn this. But what I was saying was this LED, I want to make sure that my leads are long enough. I should have left them a little longer, honestly, just to check when I place it inside its mounting hole that it's going to be able to connect to my switch, and it's going to be able to connect up here to where I'm going to be grounding my 510 connector. You'll see that a little bit later on. It'll be easier to see. So I take my 510 connector now. I'm going to add this in here. And then I will be able to check my wire lengths, cut out my wire, begin stripping, pre-tinning them, and then soldering all together. At that point, we'll be able to test it. And once we've tested it, since this is a conductive mod made out of metal, I'm going to be coating every connection in JB Weld. JB Weld is non-conductive, at least JB Quick. That's all I've ever used, and I've tested it, and it's got no conductivity. So I don't have to worry about a connection breaking off and shorting against the case. Now, I'm going to check my LED, make sure it's going to be able to connect to the places I need to. Yeah, you can kind of see my LED is just going to reach just perfect to make it to that 510 connector to ground. So coming perfectly off the switch here through the resistor to the LED, and then the ground connecting to the 510. Now the 510 is going to be grounded because I'm going to connect the other lead of the wire and solder it on the other side of this locking washer that's on the 510 connector. So next step now is just to measure our wire, strip it, and pre-tin it, which I'm going to do now. I'm in the middle of this build, but I just want to take a quick second here to talk about buttons. Buttons are definitely going to be the most controversial thing when you go to build your mod, and probably with this video too. I'm sure I'll have a lot of comments about it. A DC button with a proper rating for sub-ohming is hard to come by. Now, there's all these AC switches out in the market, momentary push button AC switches that you know, are great and they look great. They come in all different sizes, but they don't have a DC rating. And what I've found through all of my research and my personal experience is the difference is the contacts. The contacts for an AC switch are going to wear down on a DC power source. So yes, you can. They can be used. They can be used with sub-ohming too. This here, you can see, is a 5 amp at 125 volt. I believe it's called a horn switch. But it's rated in AC voltage only. It's not rated for DC inputs. This was used for 2 months every day vaping, sub-ohming, until it finally went out. And when it went out, it simply went out. It got hard to press the button to make it contact and get the thing to fire. And about 2 days after that, it just wouldn't make it fire at all. No shorts or nothing. Didn't cause any problems. But that's why I'm rebuilding this whole one. I'm pulling it all out, starting it over to show you guys the video. So 5 amp at 125 volt. I know it'll last 2 months, and that's sub-ohming. If you're not going sub-ohm, it may last longer. But on the same note, I also have a stainless steel box mod that has been running for about 3 months now with a 10 amp at 125 volt button. This is another 10 amp at 125 volt button. That one's been going 3 months, like I said, no problem. Sub-ohming all the time. Right now, I don't have it on me. My sister is borrowing it. She's actually a week off of cigarettes now. She's only been using that vape that I built. And I'm loaning it to her with a K-Fund set up on it right now. And she hasn't had any problems with it. And like I said, it's been going for 3 months now with a 10 amp at 125 volt switch. Do I think it's going to last forever? Probably not. You know, the contacts weren't made for DC voltage. So after a time, it's going to wear, it's going to burn out. But for the pricing difference and sizing difference, like, here is an appropriately sized DC switch. And, you know, look at this. What the hell am I going to do with this? I can't fit this in anything. It's a fucking monster. This is a Coilhurst 9095. If you don't care about having a clicky button or none of that junk, or you know, a tidy, neat mod, then go ahead and get yourself a Coilhurst 9095. Then you don't have to worry about nothing. No matter what you do, you're not going to screw it up unless you short out or mess up one of your connections. But as far as button goes, you won't have a problem if you use this button. Alright, I have got my wires prepped here. We've got our long positive to switch lead here that's going to connect to the top contact on our battery connector down there, up to the first connection on our switch. From there, we're going to have a short lead that's going to connect from the second connection along with one of the leads from the LED onto the switch, and up to the positive center pin on the 510 connector, the little brass one there. And lastly, we have our ground, which is going to again connect to our battery connector, this time the negative side, and it's going to ground out our mod and our 510 connector by attaching to the brass locking ring up here. So first thing I'm going to do is pre-tin everything, and by everything I'm going to pre-tin my 510 connector center pin, which I'm going to take it out of there because it's a piece of nylon insulator in there, and I don't want to heat up that nylon any more than I have to and make it weak. Also, I'm going to pre-tin my 510 connector locking ring. Since that is brass, it'll make a good connection area. I don't want to solder to the threads themselves because that'll make it harder to get the thing apart if I ever need to take it apart. And I'm going to pre-tin the tops of my battery connector along with my wires. Now that everything is pre-tinned, we're going to go ahead and reassemble. You can see items I've pre-tinned again, the center post of the 510 connector. The wires I have all pre-tinned. I didn't bother with the LED, it wasn't necessary at the time. The 510 locking ring I found, since it was so tucked up close to the aluminum is a great dispersant for heat. And even with my fucking Heiko 936 at maximum, I couldn't get hot enough to solder to it. So what I did is I took it out completely, put it in my helping hand here, and just soldered it right there. It stuck right to it when I did it that way without the aluminum dissipating the heat. Great tip too, if you don't have a second hand or a third hand, whatever the hell they're called, just take a pair of needle nose pliers and stick a rubber band on it and it'll hold it for you. Alright, so now what we're going to do is go ahead and dry fit everything for what should be the last time. Alright, glad to have you all back here. As you can see, it's completed for the most part. What I did since I left is I actually recut the wires to the same lengths I had previously, And the ones I recut were the ones that connected from the battery to either part, being the 510 connector ground and the positive lead going up to the switch. The reason I did that is because with the pre-tinned wires, sticking them in through the battery connector, I didn't have enough flexibility there to get the angle and shape that I wanted to conform to around the battery holder spring tabs. So by using non-pre-tinned wire, I was able to there we go. I was able to get a nicer joint around those. I was able to curve it around there and then add the solder into the wire. So I recut those wires. Also, when I went to solder on the 510 connector, I noticed I had problems heating it up enough, again because of the aluminum dissipating the heat. I ended up having to break out my butane torch and use that in combination with my soldering iron to get it hot enough to accept the connection. But once I did, everything else went pretty smoothly. So right now we're about to do the first test on camera here. First time ever, and it'll be on camera. First thing I'm going to do is check my ohms, make sure I don't have any kind of connection where I shouldn't. So from the 510 connector to the connection, I should not have anything through the switch. And you can see it's reading an open load. And when I press the button, I'm getting connection. Now I'm going to check negative to positive. Of course, that would mean a short. Definitely nothing going on there. Up to the button. Definitely nothing going on there. And then this will always be live because it is a ground. Again, positive to negative. Not getting any connection. Good. So we got no shorts. So I'm going to take a freshly charged battery here. This is a Samsung 18650-20R. So I'll take this, and I don't have the glue in there yet, so there's nothing to really hold it in place. So I'll make sure I don't take out any of my wires. I'll hold it, press it in. Nice firm grip on that. And we could test our LED. LED is firing like a boss right off the bat. Let's throw the lid on here so nothing falls out on me. Now, I think what I'll do first is my Kraken atomizer. We'll ohm them here too, so I can show you. One of my little cheapy ohm readers. Think about these ohms. The reason I've got a label on there that says minus 0.1 is because these ohm readers aren't always accurate, and I've actually tested mine with probes to find the internal resistance. And with something that has minimal resistance, like this is a bad example, it's a screwdriver. A good example would be something like the probes on my multimeter. It reads out to 0.1 when I do it all correctly. So basically I take away that variable. Of course your mech or your box mod, whatever you're using, is going to have internal resistance. But I like to just calculate based solely on exactly what my atomizer's working with. And everything else that comes into play is dependent on whatever mod you put it on. Not a pre-factored 0.1 that we'll assume all mods have. So as you can see, it's reading 0.55, which would be 0.45 true reading. Let's throw it on there and give this mod its first ever vape. I don't know about you, but I'm excited. Looks good. And it tastes good too. But I took a combination of some virgin vapor, black cherry marshmallow. Glad I spent $50 on a new webcam that's supposed to focus. And it was 2 parts that, 1 part killer liquid vanilla custard. And I tell you, it tastes just like cherry yogurt. It's vaping great so far. Now we're gonna swap out atomizers here. I've got a little bit higher build, a much higher build, honestly, on my Stellaire Cartel Stellaire, whatever you want to call it, V2. I've got a JMK drip tip on there. Fucking love these JMK drip tips. They're actually made locally by me. So is Hanamods. They're also made locally, interestingly enough. So I am going to own this for you and test it out on our homemade mod as well. This one is reading 0.35 being 0.25 true. So we're going to pop this off, stick it on. Oh yeah. Works great. Works beautiful. The last step is gluing down your battery holder with JB Weld. I prefer JB Quick. That's what I've used in the past with great success. Like I said, I've tested it myself. I know it doesn't conduct electricity. So yeah, gluing down your battery holder is a must. Optionally, you can glue every connection you make, which I'm going to do too, just as an added layer of safety, because like I said, this isn't mine. I'm not going to have a vigilant eye on it all the time. It's going across the U.S. to my buddy Wiccan, so shout out to you, Wiccan. Your mod's done, by the way. So yeah, just glue down the rest of the stuff that you want to, and have fun vaping.